The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince Charles stood quietly in his father's former study. The room still carried the faint scent of pipe tobacco and old leather, remnants of a man who had occupied this space for over 7 decades. It was April 9th, 2021, and the Duke of Edinburgh had passed away peacefully in his sleep just hours earlier at the age of 99. Charles picked up a framed photograph from the mahogany desk, his fingers trembling slightly as he gazed at the image of his father in naval uniform from the 1940s. Prince Philip looked impossibly young and handsome, his piercing blue eyes staring directly at the camera with that characteristic blend of confidence and mischief that would define him throughout his extraordinary life. The weight of the moment settled heavily on the heir to the throne's shoulders. For 72 years, Prince Philip had been the constant presence beside Queen Elizabeth II, the man who had given up his promising naval career to support the woman he loved as she took on the enormous responsibility of the crown. Now, that steady presence was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. Charles remembered the phone call from his mother just after dawn. Her voice, usually so composed and measured, had carried a tremor of vulnerability he had rarely heard. "Papa is gone," she had said simply, and in those 3 words, everything changed. The Queen had lost her beloved husband of 73 years, and Charles had lost a father who had shaped him in ways both challenging and profound. Growing up as the son of Prince Philip meant living with impossibly high standards. The Duke was a man of action, someone who believed in pushing boundaries and never accepting mediocrity. He had served with distinction in the Royal Navy during World War II, commanding HMS Magpie and earning respect from officers and sailors alike. When he married Princess Elizabeth in 1947, he brought that same military precision and dedication to his royal duties. Charles often thought about how difficult it must have been for his father to step back from his own ambitions to support the monarchy. Philip had been a rising star in the Navy, with many predicting a brilliant career ahead of him. Yet when duty called, he answered without hesitation, transforming himself from a Greek prince with uncertain prospects into one of the most effective royal consorts in British history. The early years of Charles's childhood were marked by his father's attempts to instill discipline and character in his eldest son. Philip believed strongly in the value of hard work, physical fitness, and mental toughness. He sent Charles to Gordonstown, his own former school in Scotland, despite the boy's obvious discomfort with the harsh environment and rigorous demands. At the time, Charles had resented what felt like his father's coldness, his inability to offer the emotional warmth that other fathers seemed to provide their sons. Philip was not a man for hugs or gentle words of encouragement. Instead, he communicated through action, through example, through the expectation that his son would rise to meet whatever challenges were placed before him. Only as Charles grew older did he begin to understand the profound love that lay beneath his father's demanding exterior. Philip's generation had been shaped by war, by loss, by the understanding that life was fragile and that strength was essential for survival. The Duke had lost his own father at a young age and had been essentially homeless as a teenager, bouncing between relatives and schools across Europe. Perhaps that early instability had made Philip determined to provide his own children with a sense of purpose and direction, even if his methods sometimes seemed harsh. He wanted his sons to be prepared for whatever life might throw at them, to possess the inner strength necessary to fulfill their roles as members of the royal family. As Charles stood in his father's study, surrounded by the accumulated memories of a lifetime of service, he began to compose the words he would need to share with the nation. The British people would be expecting a statement from the heir to the throne, something that captured both the personal loss and the broader significance of Prince Philip's passing. But how could mere words capture the essence of such an extraordinary man? How could he convey to others what his father had meant, not just to the royal family, but to the entire nation? Prince Philip had been a constant presence in British public life for longer than most people could remember. He had attended thousands of events, made countless speeches, and supported hundreds of charities and organizations. More than that, he had been the rock upon which the Queen had built her remarkable reign. While she had provided the dignity and continuity that the monarchy required, Philip had brought energy, innovation, and a willingness to modernize that helped keep the institution relevant in a rapidly changing world. Charles thought about his father's incredible work ethic, the way he had thrown himself into every role and responsibility with complete dedication. From founding the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme to championing environmental causes decades before they became fashionable, Philip had consistently looked for ways to make a positive impact on society. The Duke of Edinburgh Award, in particular, stood as a lasting testament to Philip's vision and values. Launched in 1956, the program had encouraged millions of young people to challenge themselves, develop new skills, and contribute to their communities. It embodied everything Philip believed in: personal responsibility, physical fitness, service to others, and the importance of pushing beyond one's comfort zone. Charles had completed the award himself as a teenager, spending weeks hiking through the Scottish Highlands and learning outdoor survival skills. At the time, he had grumbled about the physical demands and the time away from more comfortable pursuits. Now, he could see how those experiences had helped shape his character and build the resilience that would prove essential throughout his adult life. The irony was not lost on him that he was now facing perhaps the greatest challenge of his life, the loss of his father, and finding strength in the very lessons Philip had worked so hard to instill in him all those years ago. The Duke's belief in duty, in service, in putting the needs of others before one's own comfort, would guide Charles through the difficult days ahead. Outside the study window, he could see the flag flying at half-mast over the round tower, a visible symbol of the nation's mourning. Soon, the world would learn of Prince Philip's passing, and tributes would pour in from leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the Duke's work and example. But for now, in this quiet moment, Charles simply stood with his memories and his grief, preparing to say goodbye to the man who had been his father, his teacher, and his inspiration. The words, "My dear Papa," was extraordinary, formed in his mind, simple but profound, capturing both the personal affection and the public recognition that Prince Philip deserved. The journey of remembrance was just beginning, and Charles knew that in the days to come, he would need to find ways to honor his father's memory while also helping the nation understand the true measure of the man they had lost. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Windsor Castle as news of Prince Philip's death spread across the globe. Charles had moved from his father's study to the green drawing room, where he sat with his mother, offering what comfort he could while they received official condolences and began planning the difficult days ahead. The Queen appeared smaller somehow, as if the loss of her life partner had physically diminished her. Yet, even in her grief, she maintained the composure that had defined her reign, discussing funeral arrangements and media statements with the same careful attention to detail she brought to all matters of state. Charles marveled at her strength, recognizing in it the same steel that had attracted his father all those years ago. "He wouldn't want us to make too much fuss," the Queen said quietly, her hands folded in her lap as palace officials briefed them on protocol. It was a sentiment that perfectly captured Philip's character. Throughout his life, the Duke had preferred action to ceremony, substance to style. He had often joked about royal pageantry, bringing a refreshing directness to situations that others might have handled with excessive formality. Charles remembered countless occasions when his father's irreverent humor had lightened tense moments or put nervous visitors at ease. Philip had possessed the rare ability to be both deeply respectful of his role and gently mocking of its more absurd aspects. He understood that monarchy needed mystery and dignity to function, but he also knew that it could become ridiculous if it took itself too seriously. This balance between reverence and irreverence had been one of Philip's greatest gifts to the royal family. He had helped humanize the institution without diminishing its authority, showing that it was possible to be both majestic and approachable. His famous gaffes, which had caused countless headaches for palace press officers over the years, had actually served an important purpose in making the royals seem more relatable to ordinary people. As Charles began drafting his public statement, he reflected on the many ways his father had modernized and energized the monarchy. When Philip first joined the royal family in the late 1940s, he had found an institution largely unchanged since Victorian times. Palace staff wore knee breeches and powdered wigs. Ceremonies followed scripts that hadn't been updated in decades, and there was little recognition that the world outside was changing rapidly. Philip had pushed for reforms wherever he found them necessary. He had been instrumental in having the Queen's coronation televised in 1953 against the advice of many traditionalists who felt it would diminish the mystique of the ceremony. Instead, it had allowed millions of people around the world to witness the historic event, creating a shared experience that strengthened the monarchy's connection with its subjects. The Duke had also been an early advocate for opening Buckingham Palace to the public, recognizing that taxpayers deserved access to the buildings they helped maintain. He had supported the creation of palace tours, exhibitions, and educational programs that transformed royal residences from distant symbols of privilege into accessible pieces of national heritage. Behind the scenes, Philip had worked tirelessly to modernize palace operations. He had introduced new technologies, streamlined administrative processes, and pushed for greater efficiency in everything from staff scheduling to event planning. His naval background had given him a deep understanding of logistics and organization, skills that proved invaluable in managing the complex operations of a modern monarchy. Charles thought about his father's famous interest in gadgets and innovation. Philip had been fascinated by new technologies throughout his life, from the early days of television to the latest developments in engineering and science. He had installed the first electric hand dryer in Buckingham Palace, experimented with early computers, and maintained a workshop where he could tinker with mechanical devices. This curiosity about how things worked had extended to his approach to royal duties. Philip was never content to simply show up and cut ribbons at ceremonial events. He wanted to understand the organizations he was supporting, to learn about their challenges and contributions, and to find ways to genuinely help rather than just provide ceremonial endorsement. His questions during official visits had become legendary among those who worked with him. While other royals might offer polite pleasantries, Philip would probe deeply into technical details, operational challenges, and future plans. He approached every engagement as a learning opportunity, accumulating vast knowledge about everything from agricultural techniques to aerospace engineering. This intellectual curiosity had made him an effective patron of numerous scientific and educational organizations. The Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and countless universities had benefited from his genuine interest and practical support. He understood that his royal platform gave him unique opportunities to promote important causes, and he used that influence responsibly and effectively. Charles began typing the words that would form his public tribute, trying to capture both the personal and the public dimensions of his father's life. "My dear Papa was extraordinary," he wrote, the phrase that had come to him earlier now serving as the foundation for everything else he wanted to say. The Prince of Wales thought about how his father had approached the challenge of being a royal consort, a role with no clear precedent or defined responsibilities. In previous centuries, queens regnant had been rare, and their husbands had typically either been foreign princes who remained largely separate from British affairs or men who were granted limited ceremonial roles. Philip had essentially invented the modern role of royal consort, creating a template that balanced support for the Queen with independent contributions to national life. He had walked the delicate line between being visible enough to justify his position and restrained enough not to overshadow the sovereign. It was a complex balancing act that he had maintained successfully for more than 7 decades. The Duke's decision to give up his naval career had been particularly difficult, Charles knew. Philip had genuinely loved the sea and had shown real promise as a commander. His colleagues had expected him to reach the highest ranks of the service, possibly even becoming First Sea Lord. Instead, he had chosen love and duty over personal ambition, a sacrifice that had shaped the rest of his life. Yet Philip had found ways to maintain his connection to the military throughout his royal career. He had served as colonel-in-chief or honorary head of dozens of regiments and military organizations, taking these roles seriously and working to support veterans, active service members, and their families. His understanding of military culture and values had made him an effective advocate for armed forces causes. Charles also reflected on his father's environmental consciousness, something that had influenced his own passionate commitment to conservation and sustainability. Long before climate change became a mainstream concern, Philip had been raising awareness about humanity's impact on the natural world. He had served as president of the World Wildlife Fund and had used his platform to highlight threats to endangered species and ecosystems. The Duke's approach to environmentalism had been characteristically practical and science-based. Rather than simply calling for abstract changes in behavior, he had supported specific conservation projects, funded research initiatives, and worked with experts to develop effective solutions to environmental problems. His influence had helped establish wildlife reserves, protect endangered species, and promote sustainable development practices around the world. As the afternoon wore on, Charles continued working on a statement while receiving updates on the flood of tributes pouring in from around the world. Prime ministers, presidents, and ordinary citizens were all sharing their memories of Prince Philip and expressing condolences to the royal family. The response was overwhelming, a testament to the global impact of his father's 7-decade career of public service. Through it all, Charles found himself thinking not just about his father's public accomplishments, but about the man behind the uniform and the titles. Philip had been a devoted husband who had written love letters to his wife throughout their marriage, a grandfather who had delighted in his grandchildren's achievements, and a mentor who had quietly guided and supported countless individuals throughout his long life. The complexity of the man was what Charles most wanted to convey in his tribute. Philip had been demanding but loving, traditional but innovative, formal but approachable. He had embodied the contradictions that made him both effective as a royal and beloved as a person. As evening approached, Charles retreated to his private apartments to continue working on his tribute, surrounded by family photographs that told the story of his relationship with his father across the decades. The images captured moments both formal and intimate, from official state occasions to quiet family gatherings at Balmoral and Sandringham. One photograph particularly caught his attention, showing Philip teaching a young Charles to fish during a summer holiday in Scotland. The Duke was kneeling beside his son, patiently demonstrating the proper technique for casting a line, his weathered hands guiding small fingers. The concentration on both faces was evident, but so was the underlying affection between father and son. Fishing had been one of their shared passions, activity that allowed them to spend time together away from the formalities of court life. Philip had taught all his children to appreciate the outdoors, believing that contact with nature was essential for developing character and perspective. Those lessons had proven invaluable to Charles, who had inherited his father's love of the countryside and his understanding of the delicate balance between human needs and environmental protection. Charles remembered the countless hours they had spent together on the rivers and lochs of the Balmoral estate, often in comfortable silence as they waited for fish to bite. These quiet moments had been when Philip was most likely to share personal stories or offer guidance about the challenges of royal life. Away from the pressures of public duty, father and son could simply be two men enjoying each other's company and the peaceful beauty of the Scottish Highlands. The Prince of Wales thought about how his father had gradually evolved in his parenting style as he grew older. The stern disciplinarian of Charles's youth had softened somewhat by the time his younger sons Andrew and Edward were growing up. Philip had learned from his experiences with his older children, recognizing that his sometimes harsh methods, while well-intentioned, had not always achieved the results he had hoped for. With his grandchildren, Philip had been transformed yet again, becoming the indulgent grandfather who delighted in their achievements and overlooked their minor transgressions. Prince William and Prince Harry had adored their grandfather, seeing in him the warmth and playfulness that had sometimes been harder to detect in his relationships with his own children. Charles smiled as he remembered Philip's interactions with William and Harry during their childhood visits to Balmoral and Sandringham. The Duke had organized treasure hunts, taught them to drive Land Rovers around the estate, and regaled them with stories of his naval adventures. He had been particularly proud when both boys chose military careers, understanding that they were following in a family tradition that he had helped establish. The military had always been central to Philip's identity, even after he left active service to support the Queen. His wartime experiences aboard HMS Ramillies, HMS Kent, HMS Shropshire, and HMS Whelp had shaped his character and given him a deep appreciation for the courage and sacrifice of service members. He had seen action in the Mediterranean, the Pacific, and the Indian Ocean, participating in some of the most significant naval battles of World War II. Charles knew that his father rarely spoke about his wartime service, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. But occasionally, Philip would share stories that revealed the dangers he had faced and the bonds he had formed with his fellow sailors. These glimpses into his father's war years had helped Charles understand the source of Philip's mental toughness and his unwavering commitment to duty. The Duke's Greek heritage had also played an important role in shaping his character, even though he had been forced to leave his homeland as an infant. Philip's father, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, had been exiled from Greece following a military coup, and the family had lived in relative poverty during Philip's early years. This experience of displacement and uncertainty had taught him resilience and adaptability, qualities that served him well throughout his royal career. Philip had maintained connections to Greece throughout his life, supporting Greek causes and visiting the country whenever possible. He had been particularly moved by the opportunity to return to Corfu in later years, seeing the island where he had been born and reconnecting with his Mediterranean roots. These visits had reminded him of the complex web of European royal relationships that had shaped his early life and given him a broader perspective on international affairs. As Charles continued working on his statement, he reflected on his father's remarkable ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining his core values and principles. The world had been transformed during Philip's lifetime, from the final days of the British Empire to the digital age, yet he had remained relevant and effective throughout these dramatic changes. The Duke had witnessed the decolonization of vast territories, the rise and fall of the Cold War, the emergence of the European Union, and the transformation of British society from a rigid class-based system to something more fluid and merit-based. Through all these changes, he had helped guide the monarchy's evolution, ensuring that it remained a stabilizing force in national life, while adapting to new realities and expectations. Philip's support for scientific and technological advancement had been particularly important during this period of rapid change. He had understood that the monarchy needed to embrace innovation while preserving tradition, and he had consistently advocated for modernization in areas where it could improve efficiency or effectiveness without compromising the institution's essential character. His patronage of engineering organizations, scientific societies, and technological initiatives had reflected his genuine belief that human ingenuity could solve many of the world's problems. Philip had been fascinated by space exploration, computer technology, and medical advances, seeing in these developments hope for a better future for all humanity. Charles thought about his father's famous Edinburgh lectures, a series of talks Philip had given on topics ranging from industrial design to environmental conservation. These presentations had showcased the Duke's intellectual breadth and his ability to think creatively about complex challenges. They had also demonstrated his willingness to take positions on controversial issues when he believed it was important to do so. The environmental movement had particularly benefited from Philip's early and consistent support. At a time when many people viewed conservation as a fringe concern, the Duke had used his platform to raise awareness about threats to wildlife and natural habitats. His work with the World Wildlife Fund had been especially significant, helping to establish the organization as a major force in international conservation efforts. Philip's approach to environmentalism had been grounded in practical experience rather than abstract theory. His travels had shown him firsthand the impact of human activities on ecosystems around the world, and he had seen how conservation efforts could make a real difference when properly designed and implemented. This practical knowledge had made him an effective advocate for environmental causes and had influenced his son's own passionate commitment to sustainability. The Duke's international perspective had also been valuable in helping the Commonwealth evolve during the post-colonial period. Philip had understood that the organization needed to transform from an association based on shared colonial history to a voluntary partnership built on common values and mutual respect. His travel throughout the Commonwealth had given him insights into the challenges facing developing nations and the opportunities for cooperation and mutual support. Charles remembered accompanying his parents on several Commonwealth tours during his youth, watching as Philip engaged with political leaders, business executives, and ordinary citizens in dozens of different countries. The Duke's curiosity about local customs and conditions had been genuine, and his questions had often revealed important issues that might otherwise have been overlooked. These experiences had helped shape Charles's own understanding of the Commonwealth's potential as a force for positive change in the world. He had seen how the organization could facilitate cooperation on issues ranging from trade and education to environmental protection and conflict resolution. Philip's vision of the Commonwealth as a family of nations working together for mutual benefit had influenced the institution's development and would continue to guide its future evolution. As he worked late into the evening, Charles found himself grateful for the complexity of his father's legacy. Philip had been far more than just a royal consort. He had been an innovator, an environmentalist, a patron of science and technology, a military veteran, and a dedicated family man. His influence had extended far beyond the boundaries of the monarchy, touching lives and institutions around the world. The challenge now would be conveying this richness and complexity in a tribute that honored both the public figure and the private man. Charles wanted people to understand not just what Philip had accomplished, but who he had been as a person. The Duke's extraordinary life deserved recognition for its full scope and impact, not just its most visible elements. The next morning brought the formal announcement of Prince Philip's death to the world, and with it, an outpouring of grief and remembrance that surprised even those who had expected a significant public response. Charles spent the early hours reviewing the final draft of his personal tribute, while monitoring the global reaction to news of his father's passing. Television stations around the world had cleared their schedules to broadcast tributes and documentaries about the Duke of Edinburgh. Newspapers had prepared extensive obituaries highlighting different aspects of his remarkable life, from his wartime naval service to his environmental activism to his role in modernizing the British monarchy. Social media platforms were filled with personal stories from people whose lives had been touched by Philip's work and example. The response from world leaders was particularly moving. Presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs from across the globe shared their condolences and memories of the Duke. Many spoke of his wit, his curiosity, and his genuine interest in their countries and cultures. It became clear that Philip had built relationships and earned respect far beyond the usual diplomatic courtesies, creating personal connections that had enriched international understanding and cooperation. Charles was especially touched by the messages from young people who had participated in the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. Thousands of participants shared stories about how the program had changed their lives, giving them confidence, skills, and experiences that had shaped their personal and professional development. For many, the award had provided their first opportunity to challenge themselves physically and mentally, opening doors to possibilities they had never imagined. The stories were remarkably diverse, reflecting the program's global reach and inclusive nature. A young woman from inner-city London wrote about how the expedition component had introduced her to hiking and outdoor activities, leading to a career in environmental conservation. A student from rural Australia described how the skills section had encouraged him to learn computer programming, ultimately launching a successful technology company. A teenager from Canada shared how the volunteering requirement had connected her with elderly residents at a local care home, inspiring her to pursue a career in geriatric medicine. Reading these accounts, Charles felt enormous pride in his father's vision and determination in creating the Duke of Edinburgh Award. The program embodied everything Philip believed about human potential and the importance of pushing beyond comfort zones to discover hidden strengths and capabilities. It had become one of the most successful youth development programs in history, reaching millions of young people across more than 130 countries. The award's emphasis on personal challenge rather than competition had been revolutionary when it was introduced in the 1950s. While most youth programs focused on identifying and rewarding the most talented participants, Philip's scheme was designed to help every young person achieve their personal best, regardless of their starting point or natural abilities. This inclusive approach had made the award accessible to people from all backgrounds and circumstances. Charles remembered his father explaining the philosophy behind the award during one of their walks at Balmoral. Philip had been concerned about what he saw as a growing tendency among young people to avoid challenges and seek the easiest path through life. He wanted to create a structured framework that would encourage teenagers to step outside their comfort zones and discover what they were truly capable of achieving. The four components of the award, skills, physical fitness, service, and expedition, have been carefully chosen to provide a balanced approach to personal development. Philip believed that young people needed to develop both their minds and their bodies, while also learning the importance of contributing to their communities and working effectively with others. The expedition component was particularly important to him, as it required participants to plan, navigate, and survive in unfamiliar environments while relying on their own resources and judgment. The Duke had been actively involved in the award's development and implementation throughout his life, regularly meeting with participants, leaders, and administrators to ensure the program remained effective and relevant. He had been particularly proud of the scheme's international expansion, seeing it as a way to connect young people across cultural and national boundaries through shared experiences and common values. Charles also reflected on his father's pioneering work in the field of conservation and environmental protection. Long before climate change became a mainstream concern, Philip had been raising awareness about humanity's impact on a natural world and advocating for sustainable development practices. His early involvement with the World Wildlife Fund had helped establish the organization as a leading force in international conservation efforts. The Duke's approach to environmentalism had been characteristically practical and evidence-based, rather than relying on emotional appeals or abstract arguments. He had supported scientific research, funded specific conservation projects, and worked with experts to develop effective solutions to environmental challenges. His influence had helped establish wildlife reserves, protect endangered species, and promote sustainable development practices around the world. Philip's travels had given him first-hand knowledge of environmental issues in many different regions and ecosystems. He had seen rainforest destruction in South America, desertification in Africa, and coral reef degradation in the Pacific. These experiences had convinced him that environmental protection was not just a moral imperative, but a practical necessity for human survival and prosperity. The Duke's interest in wildlife photography had provided another avenue for environmental advocacy. His photographs and films of animals in their natural habitats had helped raise public awareness about conservation issues while showcasing the beauty and diversity of the natural world. These visual records had also contributed to scientific understanding of animal behavior and ecosystem dynamics. Charles thought about how his father's environmental consciousness had influenced his own passionate commitment to sustainability and conservation. From an early age, he had accompanied Philip on visits to nature reserves, research stations, and conservation projects. These experiences had shaped his understanding of the interconnections between human activities and environmental health, leading to his lifelong advocacy for organic agriculture, renewable energy, and sustainable development. The Prince of Wales had often found himself defending his environmental positions against critics who considered them too radical or impractical. Having his father's support and example had given him confidence to persist in these efforts, even when they were unpopular or controversial. Philip's early recognition of environmental challenges had validated Charles's own concerns and encouraged him to use his platform to promote sustainable practices. As Charles continued refining his tribute, he thought about his father's remarkable ability to balance tradition with innovation throughout his royal career. Philip had understood that the monarchy needed to preserve its essential character and dignity while adapting to changing social expectations and technological developments. This balancing act had required constant judgment calls about which traditions to maintain and which practices to modernize. The Duke's naval background had given him valuable experience in leadership and decision-making under pressure. The military's emphasis on clear communication, efficient organization, and practical problem-solving had served him well in his royal role. He had brought these skills to bear on everything from palace administration to state visit planning to crisis management. Philip's influence on palace operations had been particularly significant during the early years of the Queen's reign. He had pushed for modernization of administrative systems, introduction of new technologies, and streamlining of ceremonial procedures. His goal had been to maintain the monarchy's effectiveness while reducing unnecessary complexity and expense. The Duke had also been instrumental in opening the royal family to greater public scrutiny and media access. He had supported the decision to televise the Queen's coronation, despite opposition from traditionalists who feared it would diminish the ceremony's mystique. Later, he had advocated for palace tours, documentary filming, and other initiatives that brought the monarchy closer to the people it served. Charles remembered his father's mixed relationship with the media throughout his career. Philip had understood the importance of press coverage in maintaining public support for the monarchy, but he had also been frustrated by journalists' tendency to focus on trivial matters while ignoring more substantial issues. His famous directness had sometimes led to misunderstandings or controversies, but it had also earned him respect for his honesty and authenticity. The Duke's sense of humor had been both an asset and occasionally a liability in his public role. His quick wit and irreverent comments had often lightened tense situations and endeared him to audiences, but they had also sometimes caused embarrassment for palace officials who preferred more predictable interactions. Philip had never been willing to compromise his personality for the sake of protocol, believing that authenticity was more important than perfect diplomacy. As the day progressed, Charles found himself overwhelmed by the scope and depth of the tributes pouring in from around the world. It was becoming clear that his father's impact had been far greater than even he had fully appreciated. The Duke of Edinburgh had touched lives and influenced institutions across the globe, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to benefit future generations. The challenge now was to capture this extraordinary life in words that would do justice to both the public figure and the private man. Charles wanted his tribute to help people understand not just what Philip had accomplished, but who he had been as a person, the values that had driven him, and the love that had sustained him throughout his remarkable journey. On the third day following Prince Philip's passing, Charles finally felt ready to share his tribute with the world. He had spent countless hours crafting and refining the statement, wanting to ensure that every word reflected both the depth of his personal loss and the magnitude of his father's contributions to public life. The weight of speaking for a grieving nation while honoring his own complex relationship with his father had made this one of the most challenging pieces of writing he had ever undertaken. Standing in the same study where he had first learned of Philip's death, Charles read through the final draft one more time. The words, "My dear Papa, was extraordinary," still felt like the perfect opening, capturing both the intimate affection he felt and the public recognition that was due. From this simple beginning, he had woven together the many threads of his father's remarkable life, creating a tapestry that honored both the man and his legacy. The statement acknowledged Philip's wartime service, his dedication to the Queen, his innovative contributions to the monarchy, his environmental pioneering, and his transformative work with young people through the Duke of Edinburgh Award. But it also spoke of smaller, more personal qualities, the curiosity that drove him to ask probing questions at every event, the humor that could defuse tense situations, the genuine care he showed for people from all walks of life. Charles had decided to include specific examples of his father's impact, rather than relying on general praise. He wrote about the millions of young people whose lives had been changed by the Duke of Edinburgh Award, about the conservation projects that had saved endangered species, about the scientific and engineering organizations that had benefited from Philip's patronage and support. These concrete achievements spoke more powerfully than abstract tributes ever could. The Prince of Wales also chose to acknowledge the challenges his father had faced, the difficulty of creating a role as royal consort that had no clear precedent, the sacrifice involved in giving up a promising naval career, the constant pressure of public scrutiny. Philip's success in overcoming these obstacles and turning them into opportunities for service made his achievements even more remarkable. Perhaps most importantly, Charles wanted to convey the profound love that had sustained his parents' 73-year marriage. This had been the foundation of everything else Philip had accomplished, the relationship that had given him purpose and strength throughout his long life. The Duke's devotion to the Queen had never wavered, even as he carved out his own significant role in public life. Reading about Philip in the newspapers and watching documentaries about his life, Charles was struck by how many people had personal stories about encounters with the Duke. These ranged from formal meetings at state occasions to chance conversations during walkabouts, but they all shared common themes. People remembered Philip's genuine interest in their work, his thoughtful questions, his unexpected humor, and his ability to make them feel that their contributions mattered. A particularly moving account came from a young engineer who had met Philip at a technology exhibition 20 years earlier. The Duke had spent nearly an hour discussing the technical details of a new manufacturing process, asking probing questions that demonstrated both his understanding of engineering principles and his interest in practical applications. That conversation had inspired the engineer to pursue advanced studies and eventually develop innovations that had created hundreds of jobs. Similar stories emerged from every sector of society. Teachers spoke of Philip's encouragement of their efforts to inspire young people. Farmers remembered his genuine interest in agricultural techniques and rural challenges. Scientists described his support for research projects and his ability to grasp complex concepts quickly. Military personnel recalled his understanding of service life and his advocacy for veterans' causes. What struck Charles most about these accounts was how they revealed Philip's authentic engagement with the world around him. The Duke had never been content to simply fulfill ceremonial functions. He had used every opportunity to learn, to understand, and to contribute. His curiosity had been genuine, his questions had been informed, and his support had been practical rather than merely symbolic. The international dimension of the tributes also impressed Charles. Messages had arrived from leaders and citizens of countries across the Commonwealth and beyond, reflecting Philip's global impact and the respect he had earned through decades of international engagement. His role in helping the Commonwealth evolve from a colonial relic into a voluntary association of independent nations had been particularly significant. Charles remembered accompanying his parents on Commonwealth tours during his youth, watching as Philip engaged with people from vastly different cultures and backgrounds. The Duke had approached each country with genuine curiosity about its unique challenges and opportunities, never imposing British solutions, but always looking for ways the Commonwealth family could support each member's development. This inclusive approach had made Philip an effective bridge between different cultures and perspectives within the Commonwealth. His Greek heritage and international upbringing had given him a broader worldview than many of his contemporaries, and he had used this perspective to promote understanding and cooperation among Commonwealth nations. The scientific community had also lost a significant patron and advocate with Philip's passing. His support for research and innovation had extended far beyond ceremonial appearances at laboratory openings or award ceremonies. The Duke had taken genuine interest in scientific developments, reading research papers, meeting with investigators, and using his platform to promote public understanding of science and technology. Philip's emphasis on evidence-based decision-making had influenced many of the causes he supported. Whether advocating for environmental protection, promoting educational reform, or supporting technological innovation, he had consistently demanded solid research and practical solutions rather than relying on good intentions or popular sentiment. This rigorous approach had made him a more effective advocate for the causes he championed. When Philip endorsed a conservation project or supported a research initiative, people knew he had done his homework and understood the issues involved. His credibility had been earned through decades of careful study and thoughtful engagement. As Charles prepared to release his statement, he reflected on the lessons he had learned from his father's approach to public service. Philip had shown that royal duty could be more than ceremonial obligation. It could be an opportunity to make real contributions to society's well-being and progress. The Duke's example had demonstrated the importance of continuous learning, authentic engagement, and practical problem-solving in any form of leadership. The Prince of Wales also thought about how his father's environmental consciousness had shaped his own passionate commitment to sustainability. Philip's early recognition of humanity's impact on the natural world had influenced Charles's advocacy for organic agriculture, renewable energy, and climate action. The Duke's practical approach to conservation had provided a model for effective environmental leadership. Perhaps most importantly, Philip had shown Charles the importance of maintaining personal integrity while fulfilling public responsibilities. The Duke had never compromised his essential character to fit others' expectations of how a royal consort should behave. His authenticity had sometimes caused controversy, but it had also earned respect and trust from people who appreciated his honesty and directness. As the sun set over Windsor Castle, Charles finally authorized the release of his tribute. The statement would reach millions of people around the world, sharing his memories of an extraordinary man who had devoted his life to service while never losing his essential humanity. Through his words, Charles hoped to help others understand not just what his father had accomplished, but who he had been as a person. The phrase, "My dear Papa was extraordinary," would resonate with people who had their own memories of Prince Philip, whether from personal encounters or public appearances. It captured both the personal affection of a son for his father and the broader recognition that was due to someone who had lived such a remarkable life in service to others. In the days that followed, Charles would work with his family to plan a fitting farewell for the Duke of Edinburgh, a ceremony that would honor his contributions while respecting his preference for simplicity over pageantry. But for now, as the first day of a world without Prince Philip drew to a close, the heir to the throne found comfort in the knowledge that his father's legacy would continue to inspire and guide future generations, just as it had shaped and enriched his own life.